On WNYC. Now another of the segments we're doing this drive that revisits some recent segments that listeners told us ran too short. Last day of the drive, so this will be the last one. In March and April, we did segments, as we often do, celebrating Ramadan, Passover, and Easter, and inviting callers to say how they observe. During each of those, some of you texted that you were atheists and wanted equal time. So we did a call-in that asked straight up, do you believe in God? If so, why? If not, why not? What makes you so sure, one way or another? Or call in if you're not sure and you're an agnostic. Well, for such a defining question for many people, that segment definitely ran too short, and people wrote in asking for more. So now we'll talk to a leading philosopher of religion about that spectrum of belief, including the contemporary question of why the U.S. is at a record high percentage of people who say they are unaffiliated with any religion. Joining me now, Meghan Sullivan, professor of philosophy at Notre Dame and founder of the school's Institute for Ethics and the Common Good. She wrote a book called The Good Life Method, teaches a popular course at Notre Dame called God and the Good Life, was a consultant to the TV series about heaven and hell called The Good Place, that brilliant series, and is currently directing research on the topic of Christian thought in AI ethics. Christian thought in AI ethics. I'll ask about that too. Professor Sullivan, great to have you. Welcome to WNYC.
It's great to be with you, Brian.
In your teaching, do you define God with your students? If we're even asking, do you believe in God? Do you first establish what people mean when they say God?
Absolutely. I think we have to spend 2 weeks on that topic in class. We can spend a few minutes on it here on the radio show, but the key for philosophy is first understanding what you're talking about before you start to debate it.
And so, what is the 30-second radio talk show version?
30-second radio talk show version of what is God? I think most philosophers start by saying that God is whatever being in the universe is omnipotent and morally perfect. So those two kinds of features, if there's anything in the universe that has the power, as the power being the most powerful being that there is and is morally perfect, then that's what we're talking about when we talk about God. And the upshot of that definition is, even if you're not sure which particular world religion, if any of them are true, almost every major world religion that believes in a singular God agrees that God has those two features and nothing else does.
So what purpose or purposes has belief in a God, the way you just define God, served for people? Where would you start to answer that question if you think it's a fairly universal answer?
I love St. Augustine, and he has, I think, an answer to this question that resonates for a lot of people. He says, "My heart is restless until it rests in thee." Basically, for Augustine, he found he was, living his life and trying to search for what ultimately gave his life value and meaning, and trying to understand why this world, which honestly is many days of the week pretty screwed up and full of suffering, why this world would be good in the first place, and found that at the end of the day, a lot of his thoughts and reasoning led him back to this idea that there must be some locus of moral perfection in the universe, and that was God.
And so that reasoning, is that, a common answer to, because what we were asking people in that call-in was, if you do believe in God or if you don't, what makes you so sure? So how common would the answer be for believers?
Well, I'll tell you, a contemporary Augustinian answer that I really admire is Stephen Colbert, another one of your fellow New Yorkers. Stephen Colbert, you can Google this on YouTube. He got a question from Dua Lipa about why he believes in God, and his answer kind of evokes St. Augustine, but he says, look, I wake up every morning and I just find I'm grateful for my life and I'm grateful for the world, like all of it, the whole thing. I just feel this gratitude. And gratitude looks for an object. Like you can't just be grateful. You're always grateful to someone or to something. And for Colbert, God is the only being that's the proper object of his gratitude. Like, he can be grateful to his parents for causing him to exist, but his parents didn't make the sun rise this morning. You can be grateful to your boss or your friends or your partner for kindnesses that they give you on any particular day, but you can't be grateful to them for the whole universe. And so Colbert says, like, he has this fact of the gratitude inside of him, and it looks for something to be grateful towards, and finds that answer in believing in God. And I think for a lot of folks, that's really one of the arguments that strikes at them when they decide they're going to be curious about a religion, or when they decide they're going to go to church or go to a worship service, is this idea that, man, there's something really, really beautiful and wonderful about this world that deserves more of my focus and attention. And eventually that kind of train of thought leads you maybe to the God that many of these major world religions have also posited.
Although Colbert is an interesting example to use right at this moment when he's getting canceled in what many of his viewers would consider an act of evil. But you defined God earlier as, among other things that people attribute to God, being all loving and all benign. So why don't more people who are in whatever religion get dissuaded when they see all the suffering in the world, all the injustice?
Isn't this such a mystery about human nature? Some people experience suffering, and it really causes them to shut off any curiosity about whether God exists. And in philosophy, we call this the problem of evil. This thought, some people observe evil and suffering in the world, and they think there just couldn't be a morally perfect God in this screwed up world. And then other people, I count myself in this camp, certainly Stephen Colbert is in this camp, encounter suffering, and that suffering drives them to want to understand where goodness could be, like what God could be. Colbert's really interesting. Not, having a show canceled is an instance of suffering, but actually, if you know a bit more about his biography, when he was a young boy, his father and two of his brothers died in this totally preventable plane accident. And Colbert talks about this quite a bit. It's like that was a period of just incredible suffering for a young kid and his family to go through. But actually thinking about that event and how he continues to be very grateful for his life and the kind of relationship that he had with his mother and his ability to survive that trauma caused him to believe that there must be some deeper, more profound goodness in this life. So suffering, for some people, it drives them away from a religion. But for almost equal numbers of people, it causes them to really seek after God, which is just it's one of the most interesting questions.
You teach ethics. Atheists would say you don't need to believe in God to believe in right and wrong and ethical codes of human behavior. So besides imparting ethics in various codes that are written in various religious scriptures and traditions, how much of the development of religion as a matter of history was really about control by the powerful in society? The first 3 commandments in the 10 commandments are, you shall not have any God before me. You can't make idols that are not me, and you can't take my name in vain. And those come before the ethics ones against murder or stealing or bearing false witness. And of course, religious power, church and state, as we tend to call it in this country, have been intertwined in many societies to this day. So how much of prescribing a belief in God has been about the powerful keeping their power?
Oh, now, Brian, you're sounding like Friedrich Nietzsche, the great German philosopher he famously thought that Jewish and Christian groups... Oh, sorry, what'd you say?
First time I've been accused of sounding like Nietzsche, but go ahead.
You could be accused of way worse than being a Nietzschean. Nietzsche is a great philosopher and a great atheist philosopher, but Nietzsche famously had this idea that Jewish and later Christian groups invented the idea of God because they were constantly on the losing end of like power battles, say with the Roman government. And so they needed to invent a more powerful figure than Rome and try to convince people to worship their figure because it was the only way they stood a chance at standing up to the Roman Empire. I'm not a Nietzschean. And one of the interesting things about the Jewish and Christian tradition, so the tradition that gives us the 10 Commandments, which you just cited, and this kind of sense of our duties to God is, at the end of the day, in the Jewish and Christian tradition, all of the commandments boil down to two. And both the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition are really clear about this. You are to love God with all of your heart and all of your strength and all of your mind, and you are to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And then Leviticus, after you get all 613 mitzvah in the Jewish tradition, all the Jewish commandments, the God clarifies that he thinks at the end of the day, if you can't keep track of all 613 rules and laws, all you really need to remember is the laws of love. And I think that when you really dig into these traditions and what they say the core of ethics is, it's actually quite the opposite of power, at least not power that we understand it in our contemporary American minds. But really, you are called to constantly be digging deep within yourself and finding deeper and deeper capacities to love other people and to love God. And that's just way beyond trying to control people.
My cousin who leads our family seders always says, you can boil down the whole Bible into one line, which is, do unto others as you would do unto yourself. The rest is commentary. So
I love it. One of my favorite points about Jewish ethics, which I learned recently from Rabbi Shai Held, has this awesome book called Judaism is About Love, which I've just loved reading. But at one point, one of the great ancient rabbis was asked this question: why did God just create one atom when he could have created like hundreds? Like, why didn't God create an army in the first instance? And the answer that the rabbi gives to this question is that God wanted to show that every single individual human life had a universe within it, had like everything that was worth loving and caring about already within it. And so that's why God decided to start with one. And I think that's just such a beautiful idea right now. This day and age, we oftentimes don't pay enough attention to this concept of human dignity that's been a central part of Jewish and Christian faith, this idea that every single human being contains a universe that's worth loving. But that is the kind of central teaching of these religions from the very first pages of the Bible, and probably a lesson that it would serve us to pay a whole lot more attention to right now in our country.
I want to get to two more questions before you have to go. One, and you're going to have to do these briefly because I know we're coming on your deadline. Do you teach the converse? Like, where did atheism as a belief come from, and what purpose does it serve for its adherents, or why there's, so much less religious affiliation now in this country than ever before?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most fun things about being a philosophy professor is, going back to Socrates 2,400 years ago, our job is to corrupt the youth with ideas, to give them all kinds of ideas and arguments to help them form their own perspective on these really big human questions. So we cover Nietzsche, we cover the polytheistic religions that the ancient Greeks believed in, and we really try to introduce our students into this great argument that's been going on for thousands of years. And I'm always excited to see where they come down at the end of the class on these big questions. They're wonderful things to think about.
So last question. I mentioned this grant project you're working on about Christian thought in AI ethics. That could be a very short paper, like robots don't have ethics. But what are you actually studying?
So we are... A lot of people think that the technological revolution is just one more nail in the coffin of organized religions like Judaism and Christianity. I think it's quite the opposite. I think a lot of people now have powerful artificial intelligence that's on their phone, it's on their computer, it's in their everyday lives, and it's causing people to ask some really profound questions about what makes being a human being special at all. And the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition, these great world religions, they have amazing answers to these questions. So one of our biggest projects is helping reintroduce a lot of folks who maybe haven't had a lot of time to learn about religious ideas or religious philosophy, to reintroduce them to these ideas about human dignity and say, hey, maybe actually there's something to these ideas, especially as we start to realize that it's not we're not a culture anymore that's like Catholics versus Protestants, but it's really all of humanity against the robots.
Meghan Sullivan, professor of philosophy at Notre Dame and founder of their Institute for Ethics and the Common Good. Thank you so much for coming on with us and spending a few minutes exploring some of these deepest questions in human existence. Thank you very much.
Hey, anytime, Brian. This was an absolute blast.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.